Hi, good morning, everyone. Here, thank you very much for coming all, taking time out of your busy schedule to attend our webinar, Professors at Play Playbook. I'm Aya Shigeto, an associate professor of psychology at Nova Southeastern University, and also I'm the chair of the SRCD teaching committee. Today's webinar gives you a quick overview of what play can look like in adult learning environments, and then how it supports more flexible, creative, and joyful forms of learning. Today's presenter is Dr. Lisa Forbes, who is the co-founder of Professors at Play. She's an associate clinical professor in a counseling program at the University of Colorado, Denver. At UC Denver, she teaches counseling techniques, practicum, internship, group counseling, counseling children and adolescents and their parents, and introduction to play therapy. Dr. Forbes is also a licensed professional counselor and a registered play therapist with clinical experience working with abused children and adolescents, survivors of domestic violence, and adults, adolescents, and older adults in inpatient psychiatric settings. She currently maintains a small play therapy practice serving children ages 3 to 8. So before we turn things over to Dr. Forbes, there are a few quick reminders. First, please use the Q&A button on the bottom if you have any questions throughout the webinar. I will be monitoring the questions as they come in. We also have a Q&A session at the end for about 10 to 15 minutes, so you can ask questions then, if not before. Second, the chat function is disabled. Again, if you have questions, please use the Q&A button. And lastly, when you leave the webinar, a very quick exit survey will pop out. Please take a 1 minute or two to answer a few questions, as your input is very valuable to us when we plan future webinars. So now, without further ado, please welcome Dr. Lisa Forbes.
Thank you. That was quite the intro. So yes, I'm Lisa Forbes. I have an undergrad in child and adolescent development and then a master's and PhD in counseling. And then, as I was saying, I do play therapy with littles. So my work kind of sits at the intersection of developmental science, clinical practice, and higher education teaching. So I'll give you a little background information about how I came into this work and then jump into what play and learning is, what it looks like. I'm going to give you a lot of examples. I might have too many for the time, so we'll see. I can speed through some of them if necessary, and then I'll give you some resources at the end, and then you'll have a chance to ask some questions too. So I've been teaching in higher ed for 10 years, and only 3 years in, I started feeling really drained and disillusioned by teaching and higher education. And I just felt really uninspired. And a long story short, I co-founded Professors at Play, which is a global faculty network that focuses on playful pedagogy. I'll also give you some resources for that website. We've got some books that I can share that have free downloads at the end. But I co-founded Professors at Play after realizing that the way that we've been conditioned to teach in higher education was not only ineffective, but it really goes against decades of research that we know about teaching and learning. And it was really just incongruent with who I am and my values, and personally how I learned as a student. Yet I was kind of replicating that same pattern that I didn't think was helpful. So when I started using play and learning, I found that it made my teaching more meaningful for me. It allowed me to be congruent in the work that I'm doing, aligned with my values, and it really engaged students. That was kind of what I was trying to get at when I first started this work, engage students. I found that it does a lot more than that now after doing it for a lot of years, but it really was meaningful. And I find that in general, a lot of other faculty and professors are interested in the topic of playful pedagogy. And I think it's because people feel kind of stagnant, and maybe the traditional forms of education don't align with our values and aren't really effective for students, if we're being honest. So I want to start with a quick poll. So I'm going to put this link in the chat. And so if you can click on that link, and also if you would rather have a QR code or something, you can see it at the top right of this screen. So just go in, pick the one that fits for you. Give you a minute here. Occasional spark looks like the leader. Okay, so just looking at these results here, this is always really fascinating to me because, many of us here today study child development, and we teach about the power of play and curiosity and exploration, imagination with little ones. And we know from decades of research that play supports learning and flexibility and creativity and social development. And yet, most of us, as we can see here, were educated in systems where learning was largely serious, structured, and play kind of wasn't present. So I think that's kind of a fascinating point there. Me. Okay. So here's the paradox. We know play is central to child development, but somewhere along the way in higher education, we decided that play and rigor don't belong together. Developmental science has decades of research that shows the cognitive and social powers of play in children and the power and the benefits of play and learning specifically. Yet, as students get older, play gets further separated from that process. And so today, I want to explore this. What happens when we take what we know from developmental science seriously and intentionally bring play into our adult classrooms? So let me, okay. So this is like a typical classroom, I would say. Some could argue me on that, but I think if you looked at a typical classroom across the nation, this might be somewhat what we see. Maybe those of you who are here and interested in this topic, this doesn't quite look like your classrooms, but from my experience going through school, this was kind of what it was. So I'll quickly talk about this, but I think it's kind of important to understand how we get here. So I think there's like the values in higher education, our ethics in higher education, what it is that we want to strive for. So have learning be about inquiry and growth and curiosity, human development, DEI, justice. These are things that I think we strive for. But unfortunately, I think there's a lot of implicit rules that get communicated, sometimes explicitly, but a lot of times implicitly, things that we learn as we kind of navigate this work. And students learn too, not just faculty learn implicit rules, but students. And I think a lot of it is about command and control, conform, just do what you're told. There's this hierarchy and there's fear established with that. There's the status quo. Students, I think, often feel threatened, or there's this busy work. You just have to comply with the authority. So I think sometimes this is what the message is that we're giving. And so it kind of makes a lot of sense why then we would see students like this. if the implicit rules that we're giving and the norms that we're establishing are these types of things, it kind of takes the joy and curiosity and fun out of learning. So what I like to think about is the spirit of play in higher education and what that might offer us. So the spirit of play, when I talk about that, I think about just bringing joy into learning, um, having the freedom to explore and to make mistakes and make their own meaning, not always being told what's important to learn, but sometimes finding that out for themselves. Increasing engagement. When we bring the spirit of play into education, it helps people feel more vulnerable and willing to take risks. We can trust each other. There's a sense of belonging. It's just, I think, what might be missing sometimes in some higher education classrooms. So asking this question today, what happens when we take developmental science seriously and bring play into adult classrooms? So real quick, if this is a typical classroom, I want to show you what play can do when we bring it into adult learning spaces. Okay, ready? Okay, so that was one of my classes doing kind of like an icebreaker thing. Um, it just, the joy and the energy in the room is so different than a traditional setting. So I'll kind of explain what was happening here. In 2021, I did a research study on students' experiences of play, the process of play and learning. And so this is kind of what I found. So when there's play and playfulness in learning, there's laughter and fun and novelty and excitement. And then when there's that in the classroom, a couple things happen at the same time. There's relational safety. So there's this warm, humanistic environment. They say, I can trust my professor, my classmates. I feel like I belong in this environment. And also play removes barriers to learning. So students come in anxious, stressed, fearful, and those things get reduced and it balances that out. With those things happening as kind of the groundwork, students said, I just felt more motivated. I felt excited. The material was more intriguing. I felt drawn to the challenge. I loved coming to class. It was just a joy. So when there's relational safety, reduced barriers, they feel more motivated. There's this sense of vulnerable engagement that happens. They feel more open to taking risks. They're more open to feedback that might feel vulnerable. And learning is more active and applied. And so there's that engagement there. I didn't study learning outcomes specifically, but the students told me I felt like I learned more in this class. Things were more memorable. It was more personal. I drew from experience because we were doing things. So I had these skills coming out of the class rather than just memorizing things. So I want to just kind of notice some things that are happening here. When play's in the classroom and learning, it creates this condition shift. And then there's this climate shift where it's warm and humanistic. And then there's this nervous system shift that kind of calms people. And that does something to the brain that then increases attention and motivation and engagement. And then that becomes a norm. And then it's kind of like this loop that just keeps feeding itself. So if we think about brain science, I could go on about this for a long time, but I'll just say it quickly. If we think about brain science, we know that there's certain conditions and emotions that create certain neurotransmitters that are responsible for learning. And so if we can think about ways that we can bring in some more of these conditions and emotions that increase learning and make sure learning is happening, then that's how we get engagement. That's how we get students focused and learning more. So if you want to know more about that, contact me. I can tell you for days and days about that kind of stuff. So basically, if you just like go to ChatGPT and type in, give me a long list of the benefits of play and adult learning, you are going to be scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. There's just so many benefits. So it's curious to me why we know these things, why we know play is important, and we know, lecturing and memorization isn't helpful for learning a lot of times. We keep kind of doing it. So there's a lot of reasons to bring play into learning. I mean, there's probably a lot of ways that you can unlock the power of learning, but I think play is a really important key that does that. So I want to talk through some different ways that play can be brought in, and then I'm going to give you some specific examples from my teaching. And they may not, perfectly fit for your class, but I think the important thing is seeing examples of how it's done, and then it'll spark some ideas. Oh, okay, so that won't work in my class, but I can use the idea in a different way. So some different ways that you can bring play into learning is think of play as an activity. So we're harnessing the power of play in learning. There's a lot of different things you can do. I'll give you some examples here. Think of play as also a way of being. So as ourselves, as faculty, not taking ourselves too seriously, showing up authentically, that might look different for different people. But I think this is a really important part of play and learning, but also even if you don't want to bring play into learning, I think just kind of your way of being and not being too overly serious and not taking ourselves too seriously is an important way of entering the room. And then I think of play as like a philosophy. So as I look at my classes and I'm designing activities or discussions or even assignments, the philosophy of play means playing with ideas, breaking the status quo, remaking, doing things different, making it novel. So I think that's kind of like a mindset going into teaching. So I'll give you some examples, and they're kind of based on this pyramid of play that I thought of. So playfulness is kind of the core. That's what I was describing earlier with a way of being. Who are we as faculty coming into the room? I don't know. I think there's different opinions about this, but personally, I think if I come in super serious, overly formal, kind of scary, not approachable, I don't know that students are going to be as comfortable. I don't know that they're going to learn as much. And so I believe coming in authentic, and for me, that's playful and flexible and personal. So I'll give some examples of that. And then there's play as connection former activities. You can hear these as like icebreakers. I don't like the term icebreaker because it's like that forced play at like a faculty retreat that's not a retreat. It's just a longer day of the same meeting. So I say connection formers because it connects people. And then play to teach content. I'll give you some examples of that. And then there's this thing called whole course design. I don't have time to get into this today, and honestly, I don't really know how to do this in my classes yet. But I'll give you a resource at the end, a free book download, and there's some examples of whole course design in there that are just fascinating to me. So you can read up on that too. So let's jump into some examples. So thinking about playfulness, connection former activities, here's some things that I've done. And these things can take so I have some connection formers that take 1 minute, and some can go up to 15, 20 minutes. It just depends. So even if you're like, I've got a lot to cover, I don't know if I can include play, it can take 1 to 3 minutes. There's some ideas for that. So some things I've done, the rubber duck thing here, I don't know, this was in like Chicago or something several years ago. There was this massive blow up duck in the canal or something, and then it popped and it was like deflating. And somebody took pictures of it kind of along the path of it deflating. and turned it into this scale. And I think it's hilarious. So one class I come in, okay, students, today we're going to do how are you today on a 1 to 9 rubber duck scale. So the students will say like, oh, today I'm a 9 because this and this happened. So it's just kind of a more fun and novel way to check in. That can be pretty quick. You see balloons and beach balls and paper airplanes. So I often think about what are some items that are typically not associated with higher education learning classrooms? How can I incorporate them? Um, so the beach ball one, they were playing a volleyball game, and students in these pictures all gave consent to be shown, by the way. So they were playing a volleyball game, but on the beach balls, I wrote questions. This was a silly kind of getting to know you thing. So the questions on the beach balls were like create a rant about how carrots make no sense. Um, if you woke up and found you sprouted wings, what would be your biggest concern? Like kind of silly, wacky questions. Gets them up, gets them moving, gets them laughing. You can also do it with regular discussions. So if you see the balloons on the right-hand side with the fly swatters, because that's weird, hitting balloons with fly swatters, it's novel. That was actually a discussion in my class. That was a regular discussion that I had about a topic that we were learning. And I just took that regular discussion where they're sitting at their tables and talking in groups, and I turned it into a more playful activity. So the discussion questions were written on the balloons, and we bat them around for, 30 seconds. And then I say, stop, they catch a balloon and then turn to a partner and then answer the discussion questions. And they just get so much more engaged than, the typical discussion. And then the paper airplanes, you can use these in a lot of different ways. I there was an activity we did that was kind of personal, and I wanted them to reflect on it and talk about what they struggled with, but it felt really personal, so I didn't want to out people. I didn't want them to feel like they had to raise their hand and speak in the class. So I gave them each a piece of paper and had them write down their concerns or what didn't go well or what questions they had. And then I told them to fold it up into a paper airplane or just crumple it into a ball and throw it at me at the front of the room. And then I open them up one by one and we read it and discuss and talk about it. So just something to keep their privacy in that and then also make it more fun. Something random, we were going to talk about empathy in one class. And so I said, okay, find an item in your bag, anything that best describes you, and then turn to your group, small group, and describe how your item relates to empathy. And, this is more a fun warm up, but thinking in metaphors actually helps students understand the material and the concepts on a different, deeper level. So that's just kind of a way to incorporate something novel and the use of metaphors and kind of the symbolic thinking. This is similar to the discussion questions with the balloons. I teach this class called Child and Adolescent Counseling, and we have a conversation about, we've all been kids before, but why is it that when we're adults, we kind of forget what it was like to be a kid and we lose some empathy for them. And then without that empathy, we engage with kids in ways that isn't all that effective as teachers or counselors or parents. So my regular discussion was having them think through, why does that happen in adulthood? And I don't know, sometimes when you send students off to a discussion in their small groups and they kind of like roll their eyes and heavy sigh and like, what were we supposed to be talking about? So I just think making it more exciting and novel is really helpful. So this is a video I created, and I don't know if I have enough time to show it. Maybe I'll just show like the first little bit. But I created this video and I turned the discussion into a Martian mission. So I'm like the lead Martian, create this video, show it to the students, and it basically describes that they're Martians and they have to go to Earth and disguise themselves as humans and kind of figure out, watch the adult Earthlings interact with the, kid Earthlings, and why is it that this happens, that they lose empathy for the little ones. Let me see if this will play here. Hello, Martians. Welcome to Earth. You have been sent to Earth to help solve some of the Earthlings' biggest problems. From Mars, Earth looks beautiful, but oh boy, have they made a big mess over there. They have summoned our help to tackle their biggest problems. It's going to take hard work and a lot of trips to Earth, but it's within our Martian culture to restore balance and peace. Today is your first mission. It has to do with their mini Earthlings, which they call children. So check this out. Okay. So that's just an example, and students just get a kick out of that, and they're just so much more engaged. It's just a simple little shift, and they're all of a sudden into the discussion when before there's like eye rolls and heavy sighs. And then there's I think discussions are really, really helpful, but they're so common that students kind of just breeze through them and don't really take time to engage meaningfully. So I think giving them a little agency and choice in discussions can be helpful. Um, my students did a role play in class where they're the therapist, and then with a peer, they're their client. And it's a really vulnerable thing, but it's really important that we process this because this is like developing these important skills. In the past, I wrote out discussion questions and then had the students answer the questions and process in small groups. And it just was flat. I don't know, it just wasn't going anywhere. So I decided to make it more playful and then get their buy-in. And so I gave them all these post-it notes or index cards. And then, they're the children, they're like little gooey, sticky, slappy hands. I got a pack of those, and I gave each student a slappy hand and a stack of index cards, and had them break into small groups. And I said, okay, so we just did our role play. I really would like for you to process what that was like, what questions you have, what concerns you have. What is it that you want to process? What questions would you like to hear your peers talk about, even if it's something you don't feel comfortable saying out loud? And so take a moment, write at least one question on an index card. If you have multiple questions, great. So they are writing their own questions on the index cards, and then I have them put them face down on the desk in front of them in their small group. And then I'll say, okay, so just go around one at a time, use your slappy hand and slap the cards. And then the hand will like slap a card and then it comes flying back at them. And then they read the question on the card, and then as a group, they talk about that question. And it's the same process, but they just are like up and moving and interested in the conversation, excited about it, because there's this element of play, but also they're the ones that created the questions. And so they're more invested in them, I think. So I think that's a helpful one too. Another example is thinking about incorporating children's literature. I teach mental health counseling, and so we do a lot of case studies. And I think it's applied. It's applied learning. It's active learning. We hear about active learning versus lecture. Case studies are active, but still they do them in every single class, and they get so mundane and status quo. And client Jane Doe, 42-year-old, whatever, is just so typical that they gloss over it, and it's no longer really that meaningful. So I was reading, I have two kids of my own, and I was reading this book to them one night, Giraffes Can't Dance. And it's this book about Gerald, and he's this giraffe, and he's awkward, and he's got long limbs, and he lives on the savannah, and they have this dance that they do, and all the other animals are really good at dancing, but he's awkward, and so he's not good at it. And he feels bad, and he gets made fun of, and he walks home feeling like a clot and can't do anything right. So I was reading this to my own kids, and I was like, gosh, this would be a really good case study. We have different theories, theoretical orientations that we apply to clients and cases to help guide our work with them. So I was thinking, this would be cool. I'll read them this book, read my master's students this children's book, and then Gerald, the giraffe, will become their client. So read them the book, and then I hand out like a client profile page. Um, and I Googled like facts about giraffes, and then I turned those facts into reasons why a giraffe might seek counseling. So I read them the book, gave them this profile page, and this was their client. And there were different groups, and they chose a different theory. So, like cognitive behavioral theory, narrative therapy, existential therapy. And then from their theoretical orientation, they had to conceptualize Gerald, conceptualize this case, apply their theory, use the language of their theory to describe what's happening, and then create a treatment plan to treat this client. Um, Students just have so much more fun with it, and it's still serious. It's still learning the very important skills they're supposed to be learning, but it's outside of reality just enough that it's fun and novel. And I find that when you can move learning outside of reality just enough, it kind of frees students up from the right answers, quote unquote, right answers. There's a lot of pressure in learning, and I think students think there's a right and wrong way. And oftentimes there's a lot of different ways. And so if you can kind of help it exist outside of reality in a bit, students can be more creative and free. In this case, I could be wrong, but I don't think anyone's ever counseled a giraffe before. And so students kind of were able to run free with the ideas and the treatment planning. Um, I also think about how can I make things into a game? Some people love competition, some people don't love that. And so if this doesn't fit for your teaching or your style or values, that's cool too. But I think, how can I make things into a game? So elements of game design, timers, using dice, using playing cards, um, friendly competitions. I often give prizes, and they're like water bottle stickers. You can go on Amazon and get packs of stickers for pretty cheap. And I just bring a little case in my class with me. Students love these stickers. Like every class, is there a chance to win a sticker today? So it just like gets them invested and bought in. Um, and so one of the games that I created was this feeling wheel game. I don't know if anyone's ever seen a feeling wheel before. This is an example, but the two outer concentric circles I left blank for the game that I created. But basically, the feeling wheel is the center is the core emotions that people generally have. And then the concentric circles kind of going to the outside are synonyms for those core feelings. And this is an important thing for therapists because we have to have a wide feeling word vocabulary to understand feelings and then to help clients understand their feelings. So it's important. And what I used to do is just hand this completed feeling wheel to students, and we talk about it, and they put it in their folder and don't ever look at it again. And then they get to the end of the program where they're doing practicum, which is working with real clients, and they draw blanks on the synonyms of feeling words. So I made it into a game where I only gave them the inner core feelings, broke them into teams, and I said, okay, this is a competition. This is a feeling wheel. I kind of describe what it is. Your job is to come up with as many synonyms for each core feeling as you can in 8 minutes. And so I set a timer, okay, go. And they're like going so quickly, so excited, so like engaged. And then at the end, we count them up. And then, the team that has the most synonyms gets a sticker prize. But the point of it is to get them more deeply engaged in this concept, in this feeling wheel, rather than just passively looking at it and putting it in their folder. So game and elements of game design can be really helpful for learning certain concepts. So think of, one of the things I said earlier was play can be a philosophy, playing with ideas, breaking, then remaking status quo. So think about even like assignments. Can we make those more playful? I know sometimes programs you have to keep assignments a certain way for accreditation bodies or whatever, but sometimes you have some flexibility. So one of the classes I teach is play therapy. And to become a play therapist, there's different things the Association for Play Therapy requires. One of them is you have to know the website, all this stuff. So an assignment could be the students explore the website and write a reflection paper or answer certain questions about the website. Well, that's boring. So I created that assignment and turned it into a digital escape room. And so, if you've ever been to an escape room, it's kind of like you're trapped in this room, and to get out, you have to do these codes and break these locks. And then once you break a lock, then it takes you to the next lock and you have to get the code to break that lock. So I turned this assignment into this escape room where they have the escape room locks, and then they're on the play therapy website and they're being asked questions and they have to navigate through the website and figure out the answers to put in to break the locks, and then it takes them to the next lock. And then once they escape the escape room, then they take a screenshot of that and then submit that for the assignment. So it's just a more fun and engaging way to do something that they have to do. I think about alternative assignments for students. I don't know. I get really tired of reading the same paper over and over and over, and students get tired of writing papers in every class. And honestly, I don't think it's that helpful a lot of times. And for some students, that goes against the way that they are able to show their learning best. So are we really helping students learn in the way that works for them, or are we just putting people in a box and having them conform? So I think, is there a way that we can make it more novel or give students choice about how they submit and show what they know? So I'll have the standard assignment, the paper. Some students prefer to do that, so I give that as an option. But I also have a part that says, if you don't want to write a paper, then choose a different way to submit this. There's some examples, or if you're not sure, ask me and I can kind of help you and guide you. But like I've had students submit, instead of writing the paper, they create a podcast. And so one of them did it with her partner. They were kind of in the video and they were having a conversation about the concepts that they were supposed to write in the paper, but it was a podcast. And it was just like, they said, they were like, I actually spent more time doing this than I would have worked on the paper, but it was so much more fun. I learned so much more, and it was just more meaningful. So for them, that was helpful. Or like if there's a shorter assignment, write a blog post style instead of a APA paper. I had one assignment where I had them do 3 play therapy sessions with a little kid. And I said, if this doesn't fit for your career trajectory, if you're not going to work with little kids, propose something to me. But it has to kind of fit, same concept of what we're going here for the assignment. And one student came to me and said, I don't want to work with young kids, and I don't know if I'm really going to do like traditional play therapy, but can I work with adolescents and do infuse play therapy concepts with skateboard lessons, and so do like play therapy informed skateboard lessons with teens? And I'm like, do it. And it was such a good paper. I had him publish it, and now he's graduated in private practice doing skate therapy. So like the option of just making it more meaningful for the student is, I don't know, I think that's better than just canning some assignment and writing some long paper. So I think sometimes playing with even assignment can be helpful. Um, I think a lot of you probably are maybe realizing, oh, wait, I do this. I do bring play into my classroom. I just didn't know that's what I was doing. And maybe some people want to, but haven't because, there's judgment about being rigorous and, what's serious and what's learning. But maybe you want to, and maybe you just need the permission. So here's your permission. Um, I think it's important to play with ideas, play with teaching norms. Why do we do it that way? Do we need to do it that way? How else can we do it? Play with your own limits. Bring in your own creativity. And I think the ambiguity of play can be scary, but embrace that. See where it takes you. Um, and inspire students to play with meaning and understanding. When you allow play in your classroom, there's just a huge, huge shift in the engagement and the belonging and connection and their learning. And so help them harness that too. And just bring joy back to teaching. That's what helped me kind of feel better about teaching. And inspire wonder and learning, have a little fun. If you really think about learning is an innate drive. It's something we're curious about, it's something we're drawn to. Yet somehow in higher education, we make it like this jumping through hoops and a drag and a mental health crisis. So I think there's a lot of power of bringing play into learning. Couple resources, and then we'll open it up for questions. Okay, first of all, in the middle, the free book, QR code. If you don't want to do a QR code, the website over here at the top, professorsatplay.org. On the top, when you go to that website, on the top, there's a tab called Playbooks. If you click on that, there's actually 3 playbooks. There's the original Professors at Play playbook, and these are all free downloads. And the playbook gives you like hundreds of examples of play across disciplines. So not just counseling, like um, Spanish, law, business, like a lot engineering. There's just child adolescent development, all the things. So check out that book. There's also the Professors at Play online playbook. So it's specific examples for online learning. And then the last playbook is examples and ideas for integrating AI playfully into teaching. So those are 3 books. My contact information here. Professors at Play has social media handles. You can join those, look at that. Just a plug that we are having a Playposium this summer in the UK in Exeter, June 22nd to 25th. There's more information about that on the Professors at Play website if you're interested. It's about playful pedagogy and bringing play into adult life and also adult learning. It's a fun thing. And then on the bottom right, there's a QR code for a handout. There's books and articles and other suggestions for things that might be useful for you. So we're about at 45. So we have some time for questions if, I don't know if they've been coming in through the Q&A, but feel free to send them.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Forbes. I mean, there were a lot of ideas that I want to use myself. I was just like already thinking about a lot of different ideas. So thank you very much for those fantastic ideas.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't see any Q&A coming in. So we can, oh, now it just came in. All right. So do you tell students that you are intentionally integrating play throughout all your classes?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do. I find that students, they are taught how education goes and the norms of the classroom. And so they're not really all that ready for play and learning sometimes. And so sometimes I find students can be a little uncomfortable with it if they're not sure, like, why are we doing this? And so what I do, my first day of class, Remember the research study I showed you, the process, power of play and learning, where there's like relational safety and then reducing barriers to learning, motivation. I'll put that up on the projector and show them that. And I'll say, I use what's called playful pedagogy. Here's the process of play that happens if we use it in learning. Here's why I do it. So I'll show them that to show there's like science behind it. There's a purpose to this. And I'll say, so sometimes we'll do play to learn, and sometimes we'll do a silly activity to open up and just connect at the start of class. But it all has a purpose. Even if it's not connected to the learning, there's a reason we're doing it. So I'll say that, and I find that that really helps students buy in and feel more comfortable and not feel like it's a waste of time. So that's something I do.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I mean, I think your students can see your intentionality too, right? Like,
Mhm.
this is supposed to be a playful, activity, and then they probably appreciate that kind of engagement, like a playfulness in a classroom. So that's a great idea.
Mhm.
Another question's a comment. I feel that I have been conditioned to be serious traditional teacher. When I think about the ideas you introduced today, I really like them, but I'm not sure whether I would be able to implement them effectively. I suppose my real question is, how can I remain genuine and congruent with myself while teaching in this way?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good question. Couple things. One is, in my talk, I talked about coming in authentic, not taking ourselves too seriously, being playful as a professor ourselves. That's going to look different for different people. So the examples I gave might not fit for you. And so I think part of it is kind of reflecting for yourself. How am I playful? How would that show up for me in the room in an authentic way? Some people wear silly shirts and ties. That's not what I do. Some people are humorous and make jokes. Some people, bring more like play activities. So I think just thinking, how does it fit for you? What's comfortable for you? What's authentic for you? And not forcing something that doesn't fit, because then you'll be uncomfortable. So I think that kind of takes some time to reflect on that. There's some examples in the original Professors at Play playbook. The second chapter is all examples of professors showing how they're playful. And so go look through there and just see which examples seem to fit for you. What's something you could see yourself doing in class? So I think that can help. The other thing is start small. Like when I first started doing play and teaching, I would do my whole class the same, except at the very start, we would do a 2-minute icebreaker. And that was really nerve-wracking for me because I'm like, oh, I've never done this before. Like my hands were all sweaty. And then I did the icebreaker, and then we went on with typical class that I had planned. And then I was like, oh, that really worked. They like that. They're talking more. And then I slowly started integrating more. And then I brought play into my teaching. And then I changed the assignments to be more playful. So kind of think of it as like small risks. Like, what's one small thing that I can do today in class that I can try this out? Maybe you're going to start with a joke, and then that's it. Maybe you're going to tell a personal story, then that's it. Or maybe one of the discussions you'll turn into a silly, like the Martian mission or whatever. So start small, try things out, and you'll kind of get a feel. Like you try something, you're like, ooh, no, that didn't fit me. Then don't do it again. You'll try something and it's like, oh, that went well. That felt natural for me. Then you'll kind of build on that. So I do think it's a lot of like reflection, but also trial and error and kind of build up from there. Don't feel like you have to start big. Start small. Just do one tiny thing and kind of let it grow.
Okay, well, another question, how do you consider students' diverse needs, thinking about things like different abilities or neurodiversity?
Yeah, that's an important thing. And sometimes that depends on your class. So usually I'm designing playful ideas or icebreakers, connection formers once I know the class. So, if you have a student who's not as mobile, um, I'm not going to have them stand up and bat around balloons. I'm going to make it something more inclusive where they're at their seats. So I think just being mindful of, different abilities is important. Um, And, there's like language barriers sometimes. And so is there a way to help people with that? So sometimes if it's like, there's a language barrier, we don't know each other that well. I'm not going to have a student stand up in front of the whole class and do something playful. I'm going to have them work in pairs. So it's less vulnerable at first. Um, and then I think, what was the other point I was going to say? Um, the other good thing about play is it is inclusive. I think the traditional ways of teaching and learning sometimes fit for a certain type of student, and we kind of exclude other people. But when we can bring play in, it kind of taps into different ways of learning. And so for me, I'm neurodiverse, and traditional education was traumatic for me, to say the least. And so with play, it kind of highlights different strengths, it includes different people, it sends the message that we value other things other than just sitting, listening, memorizing, taking a test. So I do think play itself can be inclusive. Um, but yeah, I think just knowing your students and adjusting for them is probably the most important thing, which you'd know that based on the specific student group you have.
Okay, so another question, do you ever incorporate lectures? Do students learn content at home, such as flipped classroom?
Yeah, I'll have them do stuff at home. Sometimes I'll have them, instead of me lecturing a topic, I'll have them research a topic at home and then come in and then they're ready to share their insights and they're learning about the topic. And when they put that agency in and do the work themselves and come prepared, they're just so much more invested than me just lecturing at them the slides one by one. So yeah, I'll have them do stuff at home. I do lecture, I do use slides, but there's some things that, yeah, I think this is important that I'm talking to them and, quote unquote, lecturing using slides, but I can still make that playful. The traditional slides are like ton of bullet points, a lot of words, and we're going through like basically like in my schooling, it was like I read the book at night and came to class, and the slides the professor went over were just the book. And I'm like, why are we learning this again? I just read this. So I try to make slides more interactive. I'll use like little emojis, little GIFs, jokes within it. Like it's all appropriate. I'm not like making learning a joke, but little interactive things within the slides, more pictures than words. So you can do lecturing, but just trying to think about how can I incorporate play and make this more novel than a traditional lecture.
Okay, thank you. Well, so one person said, I have many students who are intimidated or uncomfortable submitting assignments in ways that are non-traditional. Any suggestions on ways to support students' confidence in changing their typical expectations of learning and knowledge sharing?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a lot to do with the climate of the class. So if you think about traditional learning as like structure and rigid and formal, and there's a right and wrong way, and we do papers and tests, and then all of a sudden we ask a student be creative and turn in something different, it's confusing because it's like, wait, here's the climate, but now I'm asked to do something fun and creative and like be free. So I think sometimes that mismatch creates that anxiety. So if you think about like the process of play that I showed, play and relational safety and reducing barriers to learning and engagement, all this stuff, if we are constantly going through that loop, so every class I start with a connection former, and every class we do that, it creates this bond and this trust and this freeing that frees them. And so then when I ask them, hey, submit something that's a little outside the box, they're more primed for that. They feel more comfortable with that because that's the climate of the class. So that's one thing is just kind of making play the foundation and then they'll be more playful. The other thing is like make it more low stakes. And so run the idea by me first. We can talk it out. Or submitting a draft before it gets graded. Steps along the way. So I think making it a little more low risk. And also, I'll say if you submit this thing, I'm not going to grade on like how creative it was, or I'm not going to grade on this or that. So kind of let them know what you are grading on and be a little flexible with the grading. And then I'll say to them, if I grade it and there's a point that I think maybe you didn't hit, because sometimes if we're creative, we miss some of the points, then I will ask you and I'll have you kind of explain that point, and then you'll get the points for that. So it's like making sure they don't feel like they're going to be penalized for taking that risk.
And then kind of related to that one, how can teachers explain the value of play-based learning to parents or administrators who prefer traditional methods?
Yeah. Show them the research. There is research on this. And so I think just kind of having that in your back pocket, you can show them, the figure that I showed you earlier. Um, but honestly, if you look at it, there's like 50 years of research that says lecture is not that helpful and more active learning is. And yet we keep continuing to do the same, traditional lecture-based learning. So, I mean, the literature will back you up. Learning science, play, um, like brain literature, brain science, it all backs this up. So just kind of reviewing that. I'll give you some of those resource, or they were in the QR code that I sent you. So yeah, that and um, I don't know. I think the brain science thing is important to me because our brain learns best when we feel less stressed and less anxious and more open and free and engaged. And that's what play does. So I think just kind of having like an elevator pitch for that is helpful.
And then does this attendee mentioned, I find that I'm naturally joyful and I use play, but it can at times give off the energy that I'm flexible on everything, which can lead to unclear expectations. Any thoughts?
Mm. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think sometimes I wonder if the expectations are what we think we're supposed to have in higher education, and or if it's really what our expectations are. So if we're more joyful and playful, are our expectations matching that way of being, or are they resorting back to like the rigid formal expectations of higher education? If so, then that's kind of a bigger gap. Um, but I think reevaluating expectations maybe a little bit, like what is it we have to do, for our programs or accrediting bodies, we have to have some, standards there, but where can we be a little more flexible? So like some of the assignments I described, I can be flexible in that way, and they're different expectations, they're more playful expectations. So I think that's part of it. And then I don't know, maybe sometimes my students don't struggle with this, but I've had one class that got a little squirrely at times. And so I just had a conversation with them and I said, so remember I said I use playful pedagogy and we're going to bring play and to connect and to learn. Um, and I want to be clear that we're still learning. This is still serious. And so if there's times where I feel like we're getting a little squirrely, is it okay if I pull us back? And is it okay if we kind of revisit, the what we're doing in the class? That was just one class that kind of got squirrely, but I think just like having a conversation with them and a heart to heart, like, hey, y'all, this can be fun and it's serious. And another thing is my students said when there's play and connection and belonging, they felt like they had an easier time reaching the expectations and it was less threatening to them. So I think in a sense, play can also help you hold them more accountable to those expectations. So I think maybe the explicit conversation is something I would suggest if you're worried about that.
I guess we can have one more, given the time. So, what advice do you have for graduate students and then other early career folks who are interested in playful pedagogy but may not have the resources and or flexibility to implement what they would like in their courses?
So Are we talking about grad students taking courses or grad students who are
I
going to
think
be on
teaching, I
campus?
think a teaching, grad students, or earlier career folks who are teaching maybe for the first time or may not necessarily have a lot of resources.
Yeah. Well, I think community. I find that this work is really isolating because it's outside the norm. And when you're outside the norm, there's all these messages trying to pull you back into status quo. And so I find that when you have community, other people who are doing playful things, you can bounce ideas off of, accountability partners, that's helpful. So the Professors at Play website that I gave you, there's a community group. It's a listserv. And so a lot of people join that and get ideas, share ideas, ask questions. So you could join that and get some support there. The playbooks that I gave you, the free downloads, there's so many ideas in there that you can kind of pick and choose one or two and just try them out. Like I said, start small, just one thing. What's one small shift you want to try? And then I think, um, I don't know, once you try something small and you feel the response from students, I'm willing to bet it's going to be a positive response. And then that kind of snowballs. And so kind of think community, start small, um, look through the books to get a bunch of different ideas is kind of where I would start.
Excellent. Well, so this is already over an hour, so we want to conclude the webinar here. Thank you very much, Dr. Forbes. It was really delightful and then a lot of great creative ideas. So thank you very much for your time. And so for those of you who attended the webinar today, when you exit the or the leave the webinar, again, the exit survey will pop out. So please take 1 minute or two to answer a few questions. Appreciate that. Well, thank you very much for
Thank
everybody.
you.
So have a great rest of the day.
Have a good
Thank
one.
you. Bye.